Many years ago, I married an asshole. It's not a pleasant way to describe the father of your child, but there's no other word for it. He was a man who chipped away at my soul with his words, his betrayals, and finally, his fists. The day his anger turned physical was the day I walked away for good with our 5-year-old son in tow and never looked back. But escaping a man like that is only the beginning of the battle. The real war is the one you fight afterward, against the judgment, the whispers, and the people who are just waiting for you to fail. One of those people was my ex-husband's new girlfriend. Let's call her Janie. She was everything I wasn't. Divorced from a wealthy man, dripping in alimony, and possessing a smug superiority that she wore like expensive perfume. For years, she looked down on me, on my son, on our little life that we were desperately trying to hold together. She was so certain of our failure. So when I ran into her 15 years later, and she placed a condescending hand on my arm, her face a mask of fake pity, she had no idea what was coming. She was about to ask me a question that would allow me to serve a dish of revenge so cold, so satisfying, it had been chilling for over a decade. And believe me, I was going to enjoy every single bite. Life after the divorce was a constant, grinding struggle. I was a single mom with no financial help from my ex or anyone else. Every day was a battle to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, juggling shifts and schedules, my life a chaotic dance of exhaustion and determination. The world saw a tiny, poor, struggling woman and made its assumptions. They saw my son, Sam, a child of a broken and abusive home, and they drew their own conclusions. They expected us to fail. Janie was the lead prosecutor in the court of public opinion. I strongly suspected she was one of the women my ex had been sleeping with while we were still married, and she carried herself with the unearned victory of a homewrecker. She was begrudgingly polite when she had to be, but always found a way to slip in a comment about her latest vacation, her new car, or the maid she had to hire because her house was just so big. Her son, John, who was the same age as my Sam, was a miniature version of his mother, entitled and arrogant. Strangely, Janie and my ex would often ask me to babysit John. I always said yes. Firstly, it wasn't the poor kid's fault his mother was a viper and his mother's boyfriend was my trash ex-husband. Secondly, Sam and John were going to see each other on my ex's custody days anyway. Why punish the children for the sins of their parents? So John became a frequent guest in our small, tidy home, a home he clearly looked down on. He once watched me scrubbing the kitchen floor and announced, with the casual cruelty of a child who knows no better, "You must be poor because you clean your own house. My mom has a maid." I remember pausing, looking at this little boy and saying, "Well, John, that makes you poor too. All the money you see comes from your dad paying your mom. You don't have any money of your own, which actually makes you poorer than me." He just stared at me, uncomprehending. The conversation that has stuck with me for all these years, the one that perfectly encapsulated who he was, happened one afternoon when I was making the boys a snack. John marched into the kitchen and declared, "I want toast and jam." "Okay," I said, pulling out the bread. He wrinkled his nose. "Do you have marmalade?" he demanded. "Yes, I do," I replied. "Is your bread whole wheat or whole grain?" "It's whole wheat." "Good," he said, nodding as if approving a business deal. "Then make me toast with marmalade on whole wheat bread and cut the crusts off. I hope it's good marmalade." I just stood there for a moment, looking at this 6-year-old boy dictating his snack order like a tiny king. My own son, Sam, would have been grateful for a piece of bread, with or without jam, crusts or no crusts. The contrast between them was a chasm. I made him the toast, exactly as he ordered, but that moment crystallized everything I was up against, a world that believed money and entitlement were substitutes for character and kindness. And Janie was the queen of that world, smugly watching from her throne, just waiting for my son and me to drown. The hardest part wasn't the long hours or the tight budget. It was the fear. The deep, gnawing fear that maybe, just maybe, they were all right. Maybe I was failing. This fear was sharpest when it came to Sam's schooling. Through grade school and high school, he was, to put it mildly, an awful student. His grades were terrible, his attention wandered, and he seemed completely disengaged. He wasn't a bad kid. He was kind and thoughtful at home. But at school, he was a ghost. I felt like I was living in the principal's office. The meetings were almost weekly. Mrs. Smith, Sam isn't turning in his homework. Mrs. Smith, Sam seems distracted in class. Mrs. Smith, we're concerned he may not have what it takes to graduate. Each meeting was a fresh stab of panic. I would sit there, a small, tired woman in her work clothes, facing a desk of concerned educators who saw a troubled kid from a broken home, raised by a single mother who was never around. I tried to explain that I was around. I made him a full breakfast from scratch every morning. I was home every single night to make dinner, and we always ate together at the table. I sat with him for hours doing homework, trying to break through the wall of boredom that surrounded him. But all they saw were the bad grades and the difficult circumstances. Janie's smug voice echoed in my head, superior in every way. I would leave those meetings feeling like a complete failure, the weight of the world's judgment pressing down on me. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, terrified that my son, my brilliant, funny, wonderful boy, was going to slip through the cracks and prove everyone right. The absolute lowest point came in his junior year of high school. The principal called me in for an emergency meeting. Sam was on the verge of failing out completely. The principal suggested, with a heavy dose of pity, that maybe a vocational school would be a better fit for someone like Sam. He was gently telling me to give up on the idea of my son having any kind of academic future. I felt the floor drop out from under me. But I refused to give up. I knew my son. I saw a spark in him that no one else did. Math was his worst subject, so I scraped together every extra dollar I had and hired a private tutor. I found a man who had a PhD in mathematics, hoping a true expert could get through to him. After their first session, the tutor called me. I braced myself for the worst. "Mrs. Smith," he began, and I held my breath. "I have to tell you, I think your son is a genius." I actually laughed. "That's a good one," I said, my voice thick with exhaustion. "He's failing high school math." But the tutor was silent. "I'm not joking," he said, his voice serious. "The reason he's failing is that he's so blindingly bored he can't stand it. The work is too simple for him. He understands concepts I typically teach to university students." That phone call was a lifeline. It was the first time someone else had seen what I saw. It was the spark of hope that ignited a fire of defiance in me. My son wasn't a failure. He was a rocket waiting for the right fuel to launch. That tutor's words changed everything. It wasn't just a confirmation, it was a battle plan. We stopped focusing on the remedial high school work and started exploring the complex, beautiful world of advanced mathematics and physics that actually interested Sam. It was like a light switch had been flipped. For the first time, I saw my son truly engaged, his mind racing, his eyes bright with curiosity. He still just barely scraped by to graduate high school, doing the absolute minimum to pass his required classes, but we both knew it was just a box to be checked. The real journey was about to begin. I watched with a heart full of pride and terror as he applied to college. He got into a good state university, and from the moment he set foot on campus, he was a different person. The boy who was bored by simple algebra was now devouring quantum mechanics for breakfast. He found his people, his passion, his purpose. He declared a double major in physics and astronomy, and it was like watching a fish that had been living on land finally being returned to the ocean. He soared. Every semester he would call me, buzzing with excitement about a new project or a complex theory he was studying. I didn't understand half of what he was talking about, but I understood the passion in his voice. I understood that this was the boy I always knew was there, hidden under layers of boredom and frustration. Those 4 years were a blur of dean's lists, academic awards, and proud mom moments. All the years I had spent at that kitchen table, forcing him through homework he hated, all the meetings with principals who had written him off, it all faded away. He graduated with top honors, a 4.3 GPA in both of his majors. For a moment, he thought he wanted to be an astrophysicist. He worked in a research lab for a year before deciding his true passion was on a much, much smaller scale. He went back to school for his advanced degree, this time in nanophysics. The boy who almost felt high school was now willingly pursuing one of the most challenging academic fields in the world. His success was my vindication. Long before I ever ran into Janie again, I heard he knew we had won. Sam was not only brilliant, but he was a good man. He was kind, humble, and hardworking. He got a prestigious job in a lab, engineering semiconductors for rocketry. My son, the high school failure, was now, for all intents and purposes, a rocket scientist. He met a wonderful woman, a lawyer who was just as smart and driven as he was. They bought a house. They built a life. Every time I looked at him, at the stable, happy, successful man he had become, I felt a profound sense of peace. We hadn't just survived. We had triumphed. Years passed. Sam was established in his career, my ex and Janie had long since broken up, and the daily struggles of those early years had softened into memories. Then came the day of the local arts festival. I was browsing a pottery stall when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in a decade. "Sarah, is that you?" I turned, and there was Janie. She looked older, harder. The smugness was still there, but it was brittle now, layered over something sad. We exchanged awkward pleasantries. She told me, in a long, rambling monologue, all about her son, John. The entitled little boy who demanded marmalade on his toast had grown into a man with no life skills. He had dropped out of school, fallen into drugs, and become a heroin addict. He'd been in and out of rehab, sometimes living on the streets. My heart genuinely ached for him and for her. No parent wants that for their child. She spoke of it with a strange mix of tragedy and defensiveness, as if she were still trying to convince herself it wasn't her fault. After she finished her story, she paused. She looked at me, and that old, familiar condescension crept back into her eyes. It was a look I knew so well. She placed her hand on my arm, a gesture of feigned sympathy that felt like a spider crawling on my skin. She leaned in conspiratorially. "And Sam?" she asked, her voice dripping with pity. "Poor Sam. He was never very bright, was he? I know he was just terrible in school. Is he doing okay?" And there it was, the moment. 15 years of judgment, of smugness, of being looked down upon, all culminating in that one loaded question. She was hoping to hear that my son had failed too, so she could feel better about her own tragedy. A lifetime of petty slights deserved a petty revenge. I let a small chuckle escape my lips. I gently pulled my arm away and patted her shoulder, a perfect mirror of her own gesture. "Oh, Janie," I said, my voice light and cheerful. "Thank you for asking. Sam is doing wonderfully." I took a small breath and began to recite the speech I didn't even know I had been preparing for years. Well, actually, Sam has 3 STEM degrees now. He did his undergrad with a double major in physics and astronomy, graduated with something like a 4.3 GPA in both. He thought about being an astrophysicist for a while, but then he changed his mind and got his advanced degree in nanophysics. I watched as her smile faltered, her eyes widening in disbelief. I continued, savoring every word. "He's currently working in a prestigious lab engineering semiconductors for rocketry, so I guess that makes him a rocket scientist." I beamed. "And he has the most amazing girlfriend. She's a lawyer, just made partner at her firm. They both make 6 figures, and he just bought a beautiful house last year. I'm just so blessed he turned out so well." I let the words hang in the air between us. The silence was deafening. Her face had crumbled. The smugness was gone, replaced by a raw, naked shock. I patted her arm one last time. "It was so nice seeing you, Janie," I said, my voice full of genuine warmth now. "And I am truly sorry to hear about John. I hope he can get his life back on track. He was always such a sweet kid." The last part was a lie, of course, but what else could I say? I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, speechless. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, it was polite, and it was the most exquisitely satisfying moment of my entire life. They say living well is the best revenge. But sometimes it's not about revenge at all. It's about proving to yourself and maybe to the world that love, dedication, and a belief in your child's potential will always build a stronger foundation than money and contempt ever could. In the end, I didn't raise a successful son to spite her. I did it because he deserved a life where he could shine. Her seeing it was just a long overdue, very sweet bonus.